when and why do I like to use the telemark squat? So the telemark squat is a kind of half split squat loaded with a barbell. So I like this exercise for athletes that during their sports at certain points, they're going to have to create force, generate force and power from a lunge type position. So a lot of sports like American football, hockey, so a lot of sports has that demand. So in terms of when, I like to use this mostly in the specific preparation phase, and I will use it usually as a specialty squat variation. So if I'm laying out a squat 2 type session, which means that my A series will be a regular back squat, what I'll do is in the B series, I'll introduce the telemark squat, but I might use a special technique on it. I might use, for example, bands. You could use chains, or you could do like some type of a starting strength method like inertia from the pins, just in order to try to generate more force from a dead stop, like it would be required in certain sports. So this is how I like to set it up, to structure it into a session. And typically when it comes to the timing of it in the specific preparation phase, I'll tend to use this mostly in the before last phase. So let's say accumulation 2 of a 12-week off-season cycle. This is where I feel you get the most bang out of it, simply because once I get to the last phase, most of my power work tends to be either like using a squat movement, like a back squat movement, or I'll use a more advanced type of plyometric method. So at that point, the telemark squat just doesn't have as much of an impact on this. But the third phase of 4 in the squat 2 as a specialty squat, implementing either special techniques or special methods and implements, I think this is how you can best make the best use of it. So can you do more than 6 reps on rack deadlift? Okay, so I've covered this before, but I'll come back to it. So I like to not prescribe more than 6 reps on conventional deadlifts from the floor, assuming you're using a 4-1x0 tempo. The reason is the conventional deadlift from the floor is very, very demanding, and because, well, you're using all the muscles basically, but you're also using a full range of motion. And then on top of it, because of the tempo, you're basically doing a lift from a dead stop on each and every rep. So what happens is on the conventional deadlift from the floor, if you do more than 6 reps, most people will tend to be below 70% of 1RM if they go for like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, or 12 reps. And we know that 70% of 1RM tends to be that sweet spot, or that minimum threshold if you want, in order to truly push strength gains. So if you're prescribing 10 repetitions, but in order for you to do 10 reps on a 4-1x0 tempo, you can only use 60% of 1RM, then it's too light. The weight is just too light to create the response you want, which is why I don't like to go above 6 reps. Now, on all other deadlift variations, that we're doing trap bar, rack deadlift from below the knee, above the knee, mid-thigh, Romanian deadlift, all of these deadlift variations, you can do as many repetitions as you want. Either because the technique allows you for better leverage, with the trap bar for example, or the range of motion is shorter, like the rack deadlift variations, okay? Or the movement is just more like purely hip dominant, like a Romanian deadlift. So if you're doing these variations, it's okay to go all the way up to 12 reps if you want. That's not an issue. Whenever I talk about maximum 6 reps on deadlift, I mean the conventional deadlift from the floor using a 4-1x0 tempo. When and why would you use thick grip implements with the athletic population? So, thick grip implements, especially with pressing movement, it's not as much as you're going to develop grip strength. That's not really what pressing with a thick grip does. What it does is it changes the motor recruitment pattern. So that you're just going to tap in different motor units within the same muscles that you're training. So with the elite athlete, once you progress through the off-season training, and the elite athlete, typically, neurally speaking, they're very efficient, they're very effective. So you as a coach, you need to find ways and tricks to try to keep the athlete progressing while still sticking to your basic core movements that are at the base of your programming, right? So if you've been doing a few phases with standard grip implements, let's say you're bench pressing and you've done 1 or 2 phases with a regular barbell, then it's not a bad thing as you're progressing to now maybe implementing thick grip on your bench press simply to change the motor recruitment pattern, the motor unit recruitment pattern, so you tap in different fibers so you can prolong the progress doing bench press. Now, how do you decide which thick grip width? I mean, there's no true set rules. Like what I tend to do with entry-level trainees is I just simply progress the thickness from, let's say, 2-inch to 2.5 to 3. Now, if you're training somebody more advanced and they're performing a sport where they're going to have to grab something of a certain size or hold on to something of a certain size, then you can right away implement the grip that most resemble the thickness in which they're going to use during their sport. Now, there's not really a rule, to me at least, there's not a rule of like, you need to do like 2 standard to 1 thick grip. Like I don't really program that way. It's really more for me a question of either being specific to the grips that they have to deal with in their sport, or it's a question of progressing grip thickness over time simply to change the motor unit recruitment pattern to further progress the development of the athlete. So I don't really have rules like that. Now, if you're using thick grip on pulling movement, now obviously this will have an impact on grip strength because now you're holding on to the grip. So this is another benefit. But with pulling though, I will say that I never use more than 1 thick grip pulling movement per phase, because I have found that when you overdo thick grip on pulling, so let's say you were to do chin-ups twice a week on thick grip implements, plus you do like dumbbell row variation with thick grip dumbbells, this to me, at least for long term, it would be way too much. You're going to find your athlete complain of wrist and elbow issues. So with pulling, you have to be a little bit more careful with the use of the thick grip than you would with your pressing movement. So this is just one thing to keep in mind. But yeah, so these are kind of how I deal with thick grip implements. Would I use a 40x0 for a relative strength cycle, or would I speed up the eccentric speed? So the tempo prescription, it's more a question of your training age, where you are in your long-term training plan. So to me, if you're a year 1, it doesn't really matter what type of phase you're in. You should use a 40x0 tempo to build your base. It doesn't matter at all that you're doing relative strength. So to answer that question, yes, even for relative strength, I would use a 40x0 tempo. Now, I just want to be clear with tempo prescription. I often talk about 40x0 because to me that's my starting point tempo. Okay, so it's the tempo that will, for the newbie trainer, it will give you a good base of eccentric strength, a good base or a good speed in which to perfect technique or to improve tendon ligament strength, and on and on and on. But as you get more advanced, especially talking about the athletic population, eventually you need to increase the tempo. My intermediate athletes, they're going to use the 30x0 tempo. My advanced athlete, 20x0 tempo. And even like in the power phases, for example, with the athlete, it might be as fast as 10x0, simply because at one point, if you have 3 or 4 years of training age and you have that good base and your strength level is really high, and now you're trying to push your athletic performance to a higher level, you need to learn to be fast overall. Okay, so you cannot just always do a 40x0 for life with your athletes, because you're going to take away a lot of their potential performance. But if you're training the general pup, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, 40 years old, they're training for health benefits, longevity, and etc., then to me it's very simple. I will use 40x0 on their A series basically forever, because to me, for them, there's no real benefit to go to a 20x0, 10x0 tempo. They don't really need that type of eccentric to concentric speed conversion that's required with athletes. So to me, it's just safer. You get more bang for your buck with that population to use 40x0. So even if with them I'm using relative strength, I'll stick to 40x0. But the same thing with the athlete. If I'm a year 1 athlete and I'm doing relative strength, I'll still use 40x0. If I'm a year 5 athlete and I'm doing a relative strength, I might be doing 20x0 tempo, but I'll be doing 20x0 tempo across the entire off-season training. Okay, so that's what you need to understand about tempo prescription. It's not always 40x0, and it's not necessarily cycle goal dependent. When using the inertia method, what percentage weight would you use? So let's say inertia top half, what percentage weight would you use compared to your one arm squat? This one is really, really hard to answer, simply because there's so much variability between people that it's hard to have a true number. Now, generally speaking, a mid-range back squat, most people will do well with 125 of their 1RM. Okay, so if you squat 100 kilos for a 1RM, a inertia squat from mid-range, you should be able to use 125. But this really is just a gauge, because you have people that have very poor speed strength, starting strength expression, and for them to lose the momentum, so to start from the pit at midpoint without the momentum propulsing the weight concentrically, they're going to be stuck and they might not even be able to do 125. And then on the flip side, when you have very efficient athletes that are very good at expressing top force at the end range of their squat, they're going to be able to use way more than 125. Okay, so all I'm saying is use 125% as a starting gauge to assess your first set maybe, but then be quick to readjust and reevaluate up or down depending on the skill set of the athlete that you're training. Okay, so this one is not set in stone, and it becomes even like the range becomes even wider if we're talking about top third or bottom third and stuff like that. But that 125 seems to be a good starting point.